Hello there, and welcome along to Season 3 and Episode 6 of the Gardner Ben podcast, brought to you in association with Peter Beales Roses, winner of 30 Chelsea gold medals and crafting timeless roses since 1968. Shop online at www.peterbealesroses.com and make sure that you're following along on Instagram and TikTok. I can't get over how quickly we're getting through the episodes of this particular season, and I hope that you're enjoying the episodes as they land every single Monday. This week in the garden, I'm going to be making the most of the unseasonably warm weather. Over the summer and spring months, my lawn has taken a real pounding, and if yours is anything like mine, during the summer months of June, July, August and September, it was as brown as a piece of toast and as dry as dry. As soon as the rain arrived in mid-September, it actually bounced back quite well. But as you can expect, there's quite a lot of weed growth that's crept into it and some huge patches that haven't recovered at all. So now pretty much all the leaves are down. It's time to do a little bit of remedial work and hopefully get some more grass into it. So now I can stop mowing it as the temperatures start to lower ever so slightly and most of the leaves have fallen. I can stop breaking those up as well. I'm actually going to go over the areas that are really badly compacted and pretty much bare with my garden fork, and I'm going to give it a really good pricking. Now all this involves is basically inserting the garden fork into the soil to a depth of around 2.5 to 3 inches and giving it a slight wiggle. This not only adds a little bit of aeration to the surface of the soil, but also gives you something to brush your lawn seed down into, hiding it away from the pesky squirrels and of course the pigeons, which absolutely love lawn seed. Once I've sprinkled over a good amount of lawn seed and I've actually hollow tined the entire area with my garden fork, I'm then going to give it a light dusting of fresh organic matter in the form of a little bit of soil improver. This is 100% organic, ground green waste which is composted down and obviously is peat free. And I'm going to sprinkle a small amount of this over the surface, and then with a soft brush I'm going to brush not only the organic compost but also the lawn seed down into the holes that I've created. Over a period of time, this will form little plugs of grass, which will grow away nicely all the way over the winter months. And it will germinate quite nicely as long as the temperatures stay somewhere above about 10 degrees, which they look like they're going to do for some weeks. In the spring, I will then hollow tine the entire lawn and go over it with a scarifier to remove as much of the weeds as possible. But for now, that should do quite nicely. As I may have already mentioned, I'm also working on a really substantial piece of media for you, focusing on the beautiful world of rose hips and how they can be grown, used and displayed during the coming weeks and months, and focusing my attention on the best roses to grow, not only bush but also climbing and rambling roses that produce a beautiful display of golden, yellow and bright red hips during the autumn and winter months, which are adored by the birds and by myself as a gardener. So look out for that great big piece of media that will be coming for you for the 1st of December. This week, the Gardner Ben podcast is staying pretty much on home soil and is heading up to Scotland, where I had a conversation with Ethan, who is a plant and soil ecologist. The conversation is really very interesting and his passion for his chosen subject really does shine through. So I hope you enjoy the conversation that follows. Well, on today's episode of the podcast, we're heading up to Scotland and I'm joined by Ethan. Ethan, how are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm really, really well. It's really lovely to talk to you. Now, I'm saying we're up in Scotland, but you are up in Scotland, but you are from the New Forest originally, is that right?
I am, yeah. I come from a little town called Hordle, but I grew up and went to school in Lymington, which is a really, really sort of lovely part of the forest.
It is indeed. So, being a forest, well, I call myself a forest dweller. We've got several group chats with our friends down here in the New Forest. So, a fellow forest dweller. So, welcome along to the podcast. Ethan, I have to confess, and I feel like I'm going to read you a little bit for this. This is not a trap. You are one of the most difficult podcast guests I've ever had to research.
Yeah,
Your
yeah.
online footprint is sketchy, to say the least. I know what you do because I've been following you for quite some time since I discovered your account. I think it was when you won your RHS Chelsea medal. Tell everybody a little bit about what it is you do, because I know what you do, but nobody else will probably know what you do.
No, not at all. So I've had a really sort of non-linear journey to where I am at the moment. So I started many years ago as a horticulturalist.
Yes, you
Um,
say many years ago. You're still so incredibly young.
yeah, I guess maybe it feels for me a while ago.
But
How many years ago? What when I was in college? So maybe I don't know, 6 years ago
yeah,
potentially is
but
when I
I'd like to
first
make
trained.
I'd like to make it quite clear that you do have quite the pedigree, though. So I'll let you tell the audience a little bit about what it is you've been doing.
Yeah, so I trained as a horticulturalist at Sparshot College,
Ditto.
um, in Winchester, which was sort of fantastic and really sort of opened a lot of doors. And I
Yeah,
worked in some nurseries. I did some sort of conservation, horticulture, and decided that I really enjoyed sinking my teeth into more of the sciencey aspect. So I
yeah.
then retrained as a plant scientist, um, and I really, for the past sort of 3, 4 years, have been really focused on soils and particularly sort of the things that live in soils, so fungi and roots, and I'm now starting a PhD up in Scotland, which is focused on grasslands and ecology and how people relate to these environments. And it's very multifaceted. I carry a lot of sort of disciplines with me.
Wow, that is quite the journey and quite a lengthy education as well. So obviously a huge amount of self-discipline with yourself as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really fortunate that I just found something I love and I've not really been able to stop since.
Well, it is key. I want to go back quickly to your time at Sparshot, and I have to ask you, who was your college tutor there at Sparshot? I want to know whether any familiar names were still there when you attended. Obviously, I attended many years before you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think anyone that's been to Sparshot and studied horticulture probably knows Chris Bird.
Yes, very well.
Um,
Yeah, lovely,
yeah,
Chris.
I mean, he's just so fantastic, and his sort of expansive knowledge on all things horticulture, I think
Yeah.
really as a young person was such a pleasure to sort of soak up. And I mean, like the just the amount he knows and the sheer sort of volume of excitement he had for horticulture was just
hmm
so infectious.
He was the first person who ever taught me to take a tractor apart.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
I want to
yeah.
make it
I'm
quite
sort
clear
of
that
getting
I want to make it quite
flashbacks.
clear that since that time, I have never had the need to take a tyre off a tractor or take a tractor engine apart. But I did learn how to do that.
Yeah, I don't think I've picked up a strimmer in about 4 years,
Oh,
and that was really critical when I was in college.
well,
Yeah.
unfortunately, I have had the need to pick up a strimmer thousands of times in my career. But as you may or may not have noticed from my media accounts, I have hung up my boots in the on the tool aspect now. I no longer work as a commercial gardener or commercial landscaper. I'm now full-time content creation, and my body is telling me I should have stopped 5 or 6 years ago. It's screaming at me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We always joked that there should be a chiropractor service for horticultures, and we were only 2 years in, so I think maybe I swapped out sort of breaking my back for sort of stretching my mind as much as I could,
It's a
maybe.
good that's a good analogy. And I have to ask before we leave the subject, are the horticultural students still working in porter cabins in THO3 and THO4, or have they moved them to somewhere a little warmer and a little more comfortable?
No, we're still in those temporary classrooms that seem to be there forever. Yeah, maybe it's changed
Millions of
since.
miles from the library and cut off from all sorts of other student services.
Yeah, 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 all the way up the hill on that
Yeah.
chalky clay hill. Yeah.
I have a very fond memory of seeing Chris Bird fall over behind a rotavator.
We never really, I think maybe by my time he'd taken sort of more of a stoic seat to his teaching. But
Okay.
I do remember we were laying turf on that incredibly tricky soil to work on, and he would walk behind us in the pouring rain, and he would politely let us know if we were going too slow, which was his style when I was there.
I looked after the National Helianthus collection up there at Sparshot as part of my 3 year course that I did up there, and again, you'll be aware of the soil conditions up there, and a heavy clay soil on bedrock chalk is really not what a helianthemum wants to grow in. They were very, very unhappy.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the students are very, very unhappy because of that soil. I mean, it's just so. So actually, whilst we're talking about Sparshot, the reason I do the research that I do today is because of a experience at Sparshot. We were digging in an acidic border,
Uh-huh.
and we were applying to the root balls these mycorrhiza inoculum powders. And I remember at that exact moment thinking, "Oh, this is so fascinating. I want to do this with my life. I want to study these things, and I want to understand them." So yeah, really at Sparshot, I guess
That was
foundationally, I figured out what I wanted to do.
brilliant. But again, I say this all the time, and you're not you're obviously finding your own way, but I say this to people that ask me of how to keep their grandchildren or their children interested in the subject of botany and horticulture and generally growing things. And I say to people all the time, you've just got to find that little ignition point. If you can pay attention and watch them, you'll find an ignition point, whether it's a certain group of plants, whether it's an animal or whatever it may be, or a soil creature or whatever it might be. You just need to find that point of ignition and feed it. Just give it a little bit of space to grow, and off it will go. And by the sounds of things, that's exactly what happened when you were working that soil, and you found something that really sparked your imagination.
Yeah, definitely. And I've been digging since really. I've not stopped.
And without sounding rude, you get about a little bit as well, don't you? You travel quite a little. You've seen you off in Cyprus. You and your team was photographed with I've seen on the internet photograph with a particular type of orchid, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce because well, my Latin is good, but orchids aren't are my particular subject. But you do travel around a little bit, don't you?
Yeah, I think maybe it's a great pleasure of being a scientist is that you get to, or even someone interested in plants, foundationally, you're driven to explore these areas. A couple weeks ago, I was actually in a trip in South Bohemia in the Czech Republic,
Yes, you were.
uh,
Yeah.
which was so fantastic. I was out there doing some learning all about like rhizomes and bud banks, which are where plants put their dormant buds, and it was really really fantastic. But I think one of my favorite takeaways from that trip is that the Czech would take us to these gorgeous old growth forests or these gorgeous grasslands, and they would apologize because they would be really species rich, really species poor, sorry, for the Czech flora. And it was crazy the amount of biodiversity out there that is so sort of just, I don't know, casual and normal for them. It really blew my little English mind. We have nothing really like it at home.
Really.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was so we go to a grassland that would have, I don't know, maybe 50 species. And the Czech would be apologizing for how boring this grassland is. And it's like we have nothing like that at home. It was so fantastic.
So what would be the average sort of? I mean, can you recall what the average sort of species count would be in an English grasslands? I know we don't have very many pockets of them left here in the UK, but what would be the sort of head count on an English grassland?
Yeah, I think it is context dependent as everything. But if you work in urban environments like I have,
Hmm.
I've averaged out at about maybe like 7 to 15 per quadrat.
Goodness
If
me.
you Yeah, if you're going to, a ex agricultural site, you might even have lower. I mean, I've done quadrats in Cumbria where I've had maybe 5 species, right?
Goodness me, that's quite catastrophic, really, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not. It doesn't have to be all doom and gloom. In the UK, we've got fantastic chalk grasslands, and those have per sort of square meter some of the most species in the world, right? So we have that really harsh juxtaposition of really species poor environments, but also, if you know where to look, some really glorious environments.
Hmm. So yeah, it's so almost those grasslands that they were apologising for probably almost three or four times richer than we're used to seeing here in the UK. And would you put that down to the intensity of farming and the pressure that we're putting on the land here?
Yeah, I think there's lots of facets to this. You could argue that we're an island, and
Yeah.
generally islands have less biodiversity. we're also quite a temperate environment, and generally in temperate grasslands you again have less biodiversity. But it does really come down to our agricultural systems and the way that we've valued our grasslands. So I've actually just finished a research project looking at trying to bring back some biodiversity to grasslands that have once been used for farming. And it's a really tricky progress, and there's lots of research on it. But fundamentally, I think as a grassland ecologist, I would tell people, put down the fertilizers. You know what I mean? Find different ways of enriching these soils, because it's really those fertilizers that have destroyed a lot of our biodiversity.
Yeah. And on that note, as a obviously a horticulturist and a gardener, now obviously I know the answer to this, but we're gonna keep beating the audience over the head with this. How would you suggest that they do that?
I think,
Because it's always better coming from somebody else and not from me. It's they don't
yeah,
listen to
yeah.
me.
And so this is quite a nice sort of taking all of my scientific knowledge and trying to reflect on my time as a horticulturalist, and thinking about what people can actually do. I think I would always say be really creative with how you plant. Think
Yes.
about how many different species you can get in,
Hmm.
and it's really quite tricky to quantify, but species themselves will alter the soil environment, and that'll really have knock-on effects for your entire garden,
Yeah.
right? So if you're planting for, I think it's a nice phrase to like plant for a diversity of colors, right? If you've got all of these different colors and shapes and sizes, you're really going to be building up a lovely soil environment without having to put much into it.
It's a really good point. I mean, obviously, I'm more feature focused and featured on the amenity aspect and how a garden sort of looks and feels to people. But I think you've made a really good point that I say to people all the time that if you want your garden to interest you all year round, you need to plant a tapestry of things that not only interest you, but obviously interest the things that are using your garden. So if you want to to encourage pollinators, whether it's moths or whether it's bees or butterflies, you need to sort of create a kaleidoscope of color and texture, and you'll find quite naturally that things gravitate towards that texture, and that is really quite difficult to explain to people that we've become as a gardening culture incredibly clean. And I've talked about this so many times, people get bored of hearing this from me, that we've extended our homes into our gardens, our patios and our terraces or balconies, whatever it might be, and we've become determined on keeping these areas clean, tidy, and clinical. And nature and soil and wildlife doesn't like that. It requires texture, and it requires decaying matter, and it requires color and a whole load of different things brought together. And I ask people to sort of just relax. And a video I actually posted yesterday to my channels was actually just people are bombarding me already. I mean, we're now in the third week of October, and people are bombarding me. I'm getting dozens of messages about pruning, winter pruning. It's like, just slow down. We're not even really in autumn yet. You're talking about jobs for January and February. So just let the garden breathe. You take a breath, you enjoy it and relax a little bit. And these
Yeah,
things can wait. And I'm not people. I think sometimes people judge me. They think that probably maybe I'm being a little bit lazy. I'm a little bit little laissez faire. But I'm not. I'm just let the garden breathe. Let it relax a little bit. Let everything just sort of die down and the colours to fade and the leaves to drop, and just take a breath. And then you can get on with it in the new year. There's plenty of time for that. There's no need to be rushing out and doing things at the moment.
yeah, and I think that we know that it works really well. You look at like the gardens Peter Dolph does,
Hmm.
these lovely sort of herbaceousy, massively messy, but also really well planned gardens. And you want to talk about winter interest, those grasses in the winter when they have spider webs on them, and in the morning they catch the light. I think we don't have to trade off, like you said, aesthetics
No.
for a really fantastic functional garden.
No, quite. And I think that Wisley pulled that off really quite well as well, don't they?
Yeah.
They leave all their grasses standing over the winter months, and they look absolutely breathtaking. If you get the weather right, and you happen to be there on either a particularly damp, dewy morning or a particularly cold morning with a lovely kiss of frost about it, they're absolutely glorious.
Yeah, I would really encourage your listeners, if they haven't before, to go to the botanical gardens at Oxford University.
Okay.
They've been planting up prairie gardens
Hmm.
that are just so, in the summer, so full of like life and bees and butterflies. And I've not been in the winter, but I can already tell that the way they manage it will just be such beautiful like interest. And I really love that sort of prairie grasslandy style of planting. I think the fuzzy shapes and the texture, like you say, it's hard to quantify, but it just works so well.
Yeah, I recently did a campaign for a company here in the UK for encouraging ladybirds into the garden. And again, I talk to people an awful lot about just leaving large amounts of decaying matter. I mean, this is really basic stuff for you. You're probably thinking, oh goodness me, this is first grade stuff for yourself. But again, I think this is really important for us to touch base with. Again, just to leave areas of the garden completely untouched. And I've got corners here on the North Lodge. We're just over a third of an acre here, and I've got areas of the garden that I simply don't venture into. And those areas, I have to admit, I'll put my hands up, are getting smaller. They were some about 150, maybe 200 square meters I was leaving completely alone in different pockets. Those are the changed ever so slightly as my need for the garden has changed ever so slightly. But I do encourage people wherever possible to just sort of leave piles of bricks, leave pieces of roofing sheets and piles of wood behind the greenhouse or whatever it might be, because these little nesting sort of sites are really, really important. And it doesn't mean you have to sort of allow the brambles completely to overtake and the nettles to completely rampage about, but just these little tiny pockets where you don't touch things at all and you venture into very, very irregularly, I think are really important. And at this time of year, especially as things are starting to find their little hidey holes for the winter, I think that's really quite important. So if you go out in the garden at the moment, and these last sort of days of really beautiful autumn sunshine, it's quite warm, still sort of 18 degrees. There's still an awful lot of things about sort of finding their little hidey holes for the winter. And if you start clearing away these things too early, unfortunately, you clear away all your ladybirds, you clear away all of your lacewing larvae, you take away all of your all of your earwigs and things that deal with a lot of problems for you. And you think, well, actually, just slow down and leave the process alone, and everything will, yeah, balance itself out.
Yeah, completely. It's nice to hear that you're still hitting 18 degrees in your garden. In
Well,
Scotland, I think we're not there anymore. But you're so right about sort of just leaving bits, and it's about getting that balance right. And I think there's been a lot of writing about sort of the older generations have really fond memories of like bird song and all of the different insects and all of this
yes,
biodiversity.
yeah,
And that was because of how we managed not just our gardens, but our landscapes. We
hmm,
left pockets for sort of the bugs and the beasties, and those things have evolved to live in those pockets. And so now when we become increasingly tidy, we're taking away those habitats, and those species don't really have anywhere else to go.
no.
So it's not just a matter of for your garden. I think people need to start thinking wider. I think hedgehogs are a fantastic narrative for this. People are really starting to make little hedgehog hideaways, and if we can extend that all the way down to our soil, that'll be really powerful.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about soil, if I may, because you mentioned the older generation there talking fondly about things like birdsong and biodiversity, but we also, in a specific, very specific window of our generational evolution in gardening, certainly here in the UK, because I think the UK is one of the strongholds across the world of actual gardening. I mean, we're famed for our gardens here in the UK. And obviously that culture is moving across very heavily towards America. But here in the UK, we got into a habit in the sort of 40s, 50s, and 60s of digging and turning soil. And there was this, I was talking to Becky not too long ago about this on a episode of the podcast in season 2. And she said one of the worst things you can do for soil is to actually turn it. And we've got into this sort of culture in the UK of that you're not gardening, and if unless you do go outside and you do it and you break a sweat and you break your back and you're digging and turning the soil and moving stuff about. Could you throw any more light on what Becky was talking about with regards to sort of turning and working soils?
Yeah, of course. I think as soon as you move that soil, you're disturbing it, right?
Hmm.
And if we imagine that soil has to be made, it isn't something that when the planet first sort of came into existence and things started to evolve, there was no soil. Soil is built through
Yeah.
through decaying and through life and through things being eroded away.
Well,
As
again,
soon as you
if we just hang on that point for a moment and just sort of let your mind take in that. that fact. I mean, you're talking about how deep your soil is and how much of it there is. You just actually sort of, well, it's actually, I tell you what, our human evolution is a tiny, 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 tiny little tiny snippet of what this planet is endured. We are a little tiny speck. Our existence, the soil has been building for hundreds of millions of years. It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, so there's schools of thought in what I do that before soil you had these lichens, right?
Hmm.
And imagine a lichen on a stone. How many millions of years did lichens living and dying take till we started to build up what we could even consider like a crust of soil,
Yeah.
right? So as soon as you're digging into your soil, you're resetting that clock to zero almost.
Yes,
You're
yeah. So,
you're
so you're
disrupting.
bringing. So, what you're saying in layman's terms is you're taking something that was maybe laid down, I don't know, 1,000 years ago, and you're turning it to the top of the soil where it is now at day one.
Yeah, and even we can look at that clock in terms of years, in terms of minutes. Soil biota, particularly mycorrhiza, are really sensitive to how we physically move our soil. And I would say if people are worried that things aren't being turned over, the mycorrhiza, which are fungi, they're little strands of fungi, actively move through our soil, right?
Hmm.
And they're really clever. They can find pockets of nutrients they want and they can find little corners of food. That mycorrhiza will be doing that job for you, and you don't even have to break a sweat. You can
No.
just sit back and let it happen.
Yeah. But again, people think if they don't break a sweat and they're not digging and they're not turning, that they're being lazy or they're for some reason taking a shortcut for some reason. I say to them, you're really not. You're just doing the right thing here.
Yeah, I think that although our gardens in Britain are fantastic, I think we do have a culture of having to be tidy and having to be in control and
Hmm.
having to be active. And it's just how do we shake that from people? And I think there's a lot of guilt in maybe having a scruffy garden or having a scruffy corner. And it's really something that maybe we need to, as a horticultural culture, unpack.
Yeah, well, again, when we're talking about again, everybody seems is using social media of whatever form, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, to learn and to absorb information these days. And we're obviously seeing home and garden programs on the TV. Most of these programs are portrayed picture perfect. There's a filter, there's an edit, and I get really frustrated with some accounts online. I'm not going to throw too much shade on yourself again. For some reason, you use loads of stories, but don't post anything to your grid that
Yeah.
um, that a lot of people they sometimes turn the camera around and go, well, this is what my garden actually looks like. I mean, there's a huge account, and I'm not going to name it, and people will get frustrated that because I'm not one of those people, but there is a particular account that belongs to somebody who's absolutely exploded recently over the last 18 months, several million followers now, who's got an area behind their shed which is just all this stuff piled in it. It's like, well, stop hiding it for goodness sake, if that because you're portraying an image that simply is unobtainable to most people. I'm very open and very, very basic with the media that I create. I don't edit it, I don't filter. This particular podcast won't go through any editing. Or your conversation that I have with you will be might be cut up into sections, but I certainly won't edit it or filter it in any way. And I do exactly the same with my video media. It's just me with my camera with normally a rose or a peony or a herbaceous perennial, talking about the colour, the shape, the form. And I'm exactly the same when I tour the garden, which I do quite a number of times on YouTube and Instagram, because I think it's really important that you take away the unobtainable standard that people believe that is set, and it's not normal. It's not. I mean, I believe I have a beautiful garden, but there are areas of mess. I've got bindweed everywhere. I've got patches of stinger nettles, and I've got bits that I haven't managed to get to and reach and get time to focus attention on. So again, I think you've made a really good point. Actually, we just need to sort of allow people just to share their spaces and just be more natural with it.
Yeah, and reclaim the joy. Find the joy in the garden and the joy in the mushrooms and the soil. And there's so much happiness to be found in relaxing. And I think really, it's an issue in science as well. No one ever shares within a scientific social media context what goes wrong in an experiment, what didn't
Hmm.
work, and it's incredibly hard to publish negative results.
Well,
And I think
you must be making millions of movements to get things right. I mean, surely we understand that that's going on. We just don't see it.
yeah, well, everything is calculated and measured and planned and has a team of so many people that aren't even seen. And I just wish that within science and with horticulture, we can enjoy when things go wrong, and we can just really find pleasure in the untidy. And there's a fantastic website called Chaos in Delight, no, Delight in Chaos, or Chaos in
Hmm.
Delight, one of the two. And the guy that runs it is a soil ecologist, but he takes these fantastic macro shots of all of the little beasties just like behaving in their life, and they're not worried about anything. They're not planning the next step. They're just surviving. And so
They're
maybe we all
just
need to
living
be
in
a
the
bit
just
more
living in
like
the
that.
now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Let's all sort of root into the earth and feel connected to it. And with such aggressive gardening and stressful gardening, what is the point? You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, quite. I mean, I have to confess that I'm not particularly good at standing still. I've been on, again, I've talked about this quite substantial. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I've been on quite a lengthy journey myself over the last 15 to 18 months, where I've done a lot of work on myself behind the scenes. And one of the things that I have had to learn to do is to stop, listen to my own body, and actually sit. And I confess that obviously I have a large plot here with an awful lot of stuff to do, and I probably only allowed myself probably one afternoon a year to sit in it and enjoy the space before I then would get up and go, right, okay, I need to get on with X, Y, and Z, and I am making myself sit in my space much more. And it sounds such a stupid thing to make yourself do, but I actually physically have to force myself to do it. Sometimes it's in the evening. I'll light the fire bowl, or I'll sit out and enjoy the space. Sometimes I'll take some time away from my media and just sit in a chair in a corner in the garden with a blanket and just look at the world go by, even if it's for 15, 20 minutes, but just simply stop and enjoy what I created, rather than just go, right, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? Because again, I'm guilty of trying to make it as perfect as possible and continuing to work, because again, we're naturally not built to stop and just simply live and enjoy and just look at it. I think is, and I think, yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think if I may have the opportunity to maybe dive into some of the science of it,
Go for it.
um, there's been a lot of really interesting work in the sort of effect that the smells of like a garden or a forest, and the feeling of leaves and the sunlight, all of these things, if we take time to bathe in those senses, are so good.
These grounding things.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And even there's been work done to show that if you get really up close to the soil and you take your gloves off and you touch it, you're actually starting to inoculate yourself in a really lovely microbiome that
Hmm.
supports your mental health and your sort of wider being. So I think really taking the time to get inspiration from what you've already done is so important.
Yes, I think again. I think I don't know if you're aware, but today is Mental Health Awareness Day. So I think you've made a really, really good point on that on today. So,
Oh
so
wow, I had no clue. Maybe I'm just that's why I'm in such a good mood. Who knows?
no, so I think you've made a really good point, and it's really lovely to hear you talk so passionately about it as well. Becky was also telling, I don't know a huge amount about this subject, because obviously the course I did at Sparshot, it touched on soil ecology ever so slightly. We had to understand the nature and property of soils. We had to obviously assess soils, whether it was a clay soil or a loamy soil, a sandy soil, or what the pH was. I understand all of those aspects, but Becky also touched a little bit about, you touched a second ago about these microorganisms that live within our soil. I mean, these are tiny, tiny little organisms, and they don't move very much, and they live for a very, very long time. Can you shed some light on that for me?
Yeah, I think when we talk about microbes, you can either be talking about sort of these unicellular things like bacteria, so they're made
Hmm.
out of one cell. And I think maybe it is right to say that they probably don't move about that much, but I'll get onto that in a second. And then you also have fungi, and fungi can be unicellular, so yeast that people bake bread with is a
Yeah.
fungi, but it can also have many, many cells. So think of a mycorrhiza, and I've used the term mycorrhiza a lot, but I might just explain it. So myco simply means fungi,
Yeah.
and rhiza means root. So
Uh-huh.
mycorrhiza are the fungus roots, right?
Yeah.
And I think that they're incredibly dynamic. I really like to imagine them as exploring and moving through the soil. So on one hand, you do have these microbes which are kind of stuck where they are. Well, that might be a bit of a regressive way of talking about them. But you've also got this mycorrhiza that really can move through your garden if you give them the opportunity to.
Hmm.
And I think when we talk about our soil microorganisms, we can imagine them as being really small, but the impact they have is massive. And they're really, really clever things. So I do a little bit of work on the way they respond to drought, for example.
Yeah.
And maybe you would think under a period of drought, your microbes would slow down, right? They'd
Yes.
stop. They'd stop.
That
Yeah.
that would be my brain went straight there when you mentioned it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the data we found is that actually these enzymes that they use to break down the soil were really, really upregulated under drought.
Okay.
And what we're thinking sort of is happening in the soil is that these microbes, they can be really competitive or they can be really friendly, they
Yeah.
can be really slow and they can be really fast. We think that they're actually responding to the drought by becoming really competitive.
Okay.
And so they're so clever. It's really, I think, reductive to say that they just are these tiny things. They have massive implications for everything, really.
So almost for instance, this year we're experiencing a mast year with seeds
Hmm.
and nuts and fruits. So almost like that, because obviously they're triggered to the point where the soil is obviously under stress, the conditions are completely dysregulated to where they might normally be. So they may be in a competitive state to grow and reproduce, or maybe it's because they're with this little water in the soil, so there's maybe more oxygen or more air in the soil.
Yeah, it's so some research shows that they might throw everything they have at the soil and then almost go to sleep, if that makes
Yes.
sense.
Yeah, yeah.
So they'll say, here are all of my enzymes. They're going to get a lovely bank of food ready for when I wake up,
Yeah.
almost. And then there's other sort of work where people think that they actually, as a community and as an individual, make really active choices to become more competitive. So it's not this passive process.
Hmm.
They're really surviving through the drought. And it's interesting you brought up the mast year this year. I had a lab meeting yesterday and we were talking about how this year feels like it's going to be a real bumper year for fungi and mushrooms.
Yes, yeah, I can
And we were
imagine it
sort
would
of
be. Yeah.
discussing maybe those two things are interconnected, you know. And I would say that these soil microbes intrinsically are linked to the things in your garden, the plants. There
Yeah.
is a real feedback happening between those two things. It's not an in isolation thing. The microbes affect the plants and the plants affect the microbes, and how does that work on a whole garden scale? Well, that's up to what you're planting and how you're managing and all
Yeah.
sorts of things.
Right. So it's really interesting because you've brought up microphysal on several occasions, and that was one of the things I did throw up on you on my internet search before we spoke today. You've quoted yourself as being sort of the bridge between botany and soil science. That was something that you said, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think increasingly scientists are being pushed to be interdisciplinary. There's a real push for us to be generalists,
Yes.
and that's just the nature of kind of what's happening in our world at the moment. There's lots of crises within biodiversity and climate, and there's lots of people that can fix that if we work interdisciplinary. It's also how the funding works at the moment. You
Yeah.
know, really narrow projects aren't really getting picked up. And I sort of came into plant science with a really deep interest in taxonomy, which
Hmm.
is the study of how we name plants and how they've evolved and how they're related to other plants.
Yeah.
And I really combine that with a deep love of ecology and of soil science. And so I would describe myself as a plant soil ecologist. I don't think there's one word that can sum up the kind of work I'm trying to do. And there's lots of us. There's lots of plant soil ecologists, and it's a really growing field, which is really lovely to sort of witness as an early career scientist, seeing it kind of boom, particularly in the public's mind. I feel the public are just starting to catch on to some of the amazing work we're doing.
Well, I think all of us are now realizing that we need to look at the wider picture. But this is going to sound a little bit contradictory, but we need to look at the wider picture and actually then once we've looked at the wider picture, look at the more finite details. And it's again, this is going to sound very, very basic to you, but I'm going to kind of trying to bring it back to what I do, so the audience is anchoring of what I try and share. Is when I'm talking people through a process of what I'm doing in the garden, I believe, I hope, fingers crossed, he says, not trying to sound self-important, but I try and relate the science of what I'm doing back to the practical things. I get so tired of seeing other content creators sort of wave their finger at people and say, you do this. And it's like, well, okay,
Yes.
well, why do I do that? What are the benefits of doing this? And we're going to be talking. I'm going to say really, really basically here. Okay, we're heading into bare root rose season. All these roses are being ploughed out the ground, they're being chopped up into little pieces, their roots are being trimmed, the top growth is being trimmed, they're shoved in bags and sent to people. And I say, right, this is the planting guide, and this is how we do it, and this is why we do it. And the most important thing we do, as soon as we've planted it in the ground, we water it. And they go, well, why do you water it? It's wet, the soil's wet. It is, but we're talking about a micro level. We're talking about that contact between soil particle and root. Otherwise, you
Mhm.
could end up with little air gaps, and roots don't like air gaps. Air gaps cause roots to die back. And I got loads of messages every year when I say this little bit of information. People say, "Oh, well, someone told me that before." And it's like, well, again, the content creator you've been following has just been waving their finger at it. So you plant it in the ground and you jump up and down on it, and then you're done. It's like, well, actually, no, you water it for this particular reason. You keep it watered for that reason because you need those tiny little hairs that the grows to actually bring the water into the root. If the roots aren't, the woody bits aren't taking up water. It's those tiny little hair-like roots that are taking up water, and you need to encourage those to grow. And people go, oh, okay, that's great. And it's so I think that's where I find my niche within social media is actually not just this is what you do, it's this is what we do and why we do it. And people like me are, well, yeah, people like you and people like me are incredibly rare. The people that can actually translate it into a usable format and put it onto the internet for other people to sort of consume and digest, that we are very rare, very, very rare indeed.
I mean, we could talk about roots for hours. I absolutely love roots.
Go on,
That
go on.
they're
Go. We've got a little bit of time. You haven't got hours and hours, but
no.
I can give you a little bit of time. Tell me what you love about roots.
Oh, they're such a cornerstone of my research. I think they're so fascinating. And the work I do on them, and I'm gonna get a little technical, but I'll pull it back so that people can understand and I'll give some context. So I work on something called functional traits.
Yeah.
And the easiest way to imagine them is if you take a person, you can measure their height, you can sort of measure how strong they are. I do that for plants, right?
Okay.
And I've been doing a lot of work on root traits in particular. And there's something called the root economic space, which sounds really sciencey, but it can be really simplistic. And what these sort of economic spaces are trying to describe is imagine plants have currency, right?
Yeah.
Imagine you give a plant, I don't know, like £5,
Hmm.
and it can either spend it on really thick roots or really fibrous roots.
Yes.
That is the kind of research that I've really been doing at the moment. And if we take away that £5, the actual currency is carbon, right? We can look at carbon as the money of the plant world.
Okay. So
And
what would be more carbon dense? Would a fibrous root system or a woody root system be more carbon dense?
so they're probably sort of equally carbon dense. They're being spent in different ways.
Okay. Yeah.
And so plants can put that carbon into, let's say, a really a really thick root with quite a large diameter.
Hmm.
That's really attractive to fungi. So they're buying in their fungi, right? This mycorrhiza.
Yes.
Whereas if a plant is spending its carbon on a really fibrous root system, it doesn't need that mycorrhiza. It's sort of saying, well, I can spend my money on me. I don't need my fungi.
So we're talking sort of to put this into sort of layman's terms, we're talking either something, for instance, with a fibrous root system like a heather, and then we're comparing it to something with a woody root system, for instance, like a yew tree or something like that.
Yeah, well, so this is when I talk about roots, I'm talking about something called a fine root.
Okay.
And imagine if everyone at home imagines a root and it's a line, sort of a straight line going down.
Hmm.
the fine roots are the smaller roots coming off that first big initial root.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting you brought up heathers and yews because they're both mycorrhizal.
Okay.
And so it's kind of scaling into those finer roots. Um, I guess a better sort of example would be brassicas, right?
Yeah.
So if you've ever grown like a cabbage or a Brussels sprout and you
Yeah.
pull them out of the ground,
Mm-hmm.
they really don't work with mycorrhiza at
No,
all because of these really interesting fibrous root systems.
you're still there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's complex. I think, and there's another aspect to it. You can measure things like the nitrogen in the roots, and that tells you how fast a plant is or how slow a plant is.
uh-huh.
And actually, this sort of spectrum of working with fungi or going about it on your own, we call it a DIY approach, versus being really fast or really slow, can be observed across all of the plants in the world, right? If you took all of these plants, each species sort of is doing its own thing, and we can measure that just by looking at the roots.
It's incredible, isn't it? And again, it's something that you, as you quite rightly said, everybody seems to sort of forget about. Everybody focuses on the bit that they can see above ground, what gives them the gratification, but not necessarily what's going on below soil level.
Yeah, and this quite nicely sort of leans into some of the work that I've just completed actually, which was working with ecological practitioners and landowners to give them tools so they can assess what's happening below ground just by measuring what's happening above ground.
Okay, and I
So
mean, I'm also almost surprised that you can do that.
yeah, well, it's quite convoluted and tricky, but it does work. So I basically looked at all of these plants, and you could do this for your garden, right?
Yeah.
And just research what their root systems are like, and you'll find that certain plants that look similar above ground will have similar below ground systems.
Yes.
And I think if people start to think about that within their garden, we're planting for above ground interest. How many root systems can you plant in your garden? Do you have plants with rhizomes? Do you have plants with tap roots? I think if we start to sort of think in that sense, you wouldn't really need to dig your garden at all.
No, no, no. I suppose not. No,
Yeah,
they'd be doing it all for you in different
yeah,
combinations.
completely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very early work, and these sort of research on roots in this particular context has only really been done in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And historically, researchers, particularly plant ecologists, they refer to the soil as this black box, right? We know very little about it, so it's quite easy for like myself or another soil scientist to come on your podcast and wax all of this lyrical. But truthfully, we really know nothing, to be honest.
It's incredible to hear you say that because realistically, I mean, everything that we do, everything that we grow, our complete existence depends on the quality of the soil that we're growing on and the quality of soil that we're working on. So I'm almost astonished to hear you say that. It's very surprising.
Yeah, I think it's we're doing really well, and lots of work is being focused on it. But yeah, I truthfully, there is so much to learn, and that's the exciting part. Is there is so much that we don't know and so
Yeah.
much to explore, and particularly in a sort of gardening sense, I feel that there could be so much more work done on how people perceive different plants, and actually intrinsically, do gardeners know when they're planting with loads of different root systems? And I feel that horticulturalists and gardeners are some of the smartest people in the world. They have some innate intrinsic understanding of plants, and it's a real sort of wealth of information that I think we're yet to properly tap into.
Yeah. Well, I think it's always been, or the horticulture or the outdoor physical trades have always been seen as a little bit uneducated, seen as a little bit vocational courses, and I think that's still a little bit of a stigma surrounding them. I always felt a little bit pressured. at sort of 18, 19, 20, as I was starting I started my career at 14, but entering it, I always felt that a lot of people did look down on what I was doing. I wasn't going to be quite as well educated or quite as well rounded. And it wasn't until I discovered social media and I started sharing what I do quite naturally. And then people say, wait a minute, you're actually quite well versed in this. Like, well, again, in my specific subject, as a gardener, as a rose expert, as a grower, I am actually educated in my in my field, and there is an awful lot that goes on behind the scenes. It's not just taking a plant out of a pot and shoving it in the ground and hoping it does well. There is a lot of monitoring and a lot of care that goes on in it. And I think you're right, the gardeners, one of the skills that we have, I think, is actually keeping a really close watch on what is happening and what is changing. I'm out in my garden, in my space, in the wider environment before stopped working commercially, looking at how things were growing and how things were changing. And I think we've got a really, really, as gardeners, we've got a really good eye on specifically, I mean, things like climate change. I
Yeah.
have noticed very, very specifically over the last 15 and 20 years, I'm having to adapt the way I grow things, what I grow, when I sow it, when I transplant it, when my first frost will be, when my last frost will be. And every year is not the same, and we're having to make preparations and change what we do because, again, I mean, they say that stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again with and getting the same result and not being happy with it. But again, I every year I change what I do ever so slightly, and I think we need to normalize the fact that I take a lot of pictures. I make a lot of notes in my little book that I walk around the garden with, and I use the photos on my phone as a sort of a living diary of what I did and when I did it and how I did it, and tweaking things every single year to make them slightly different. So I think us gardeners have got a really good way of observing what is going on in the natural world when a lot of people may have got their heads down and in there. I mean, for instance, we said people say, "Oh, the summer was terrible." Well, it wasn't terrible. The summer was blazingly hot. For those of us that worked outside and it was hot. For those of you that worked in an office and went from your air conditioned office to your air conditioned car and then went home and then it was fairly cool in the evening, yeah, your summer may not have been good, but for the rest of us, the summer was actually bakingly hot.
Yeah.
And you often have to remind people, say, oh, wasn't the winter cold? It's like, no, it wasn't. You might have well felt it was cold because you were in the house sat still and you had to put your heating on, but actually outside it was fairly mild. And you have to sort of remind people about these little things. And the notes I made, well, actually, yeah, I didn't see a frost until this date, or it was particularly cold for about 10 days. And yeah, I think we've got gardeners got a really good way of observing what's going on, and I think I think sometimes people don't actually see that. I get a lot of comments from, especially from America, saying, "Oh, you're moaning it's hot." Here in Florida, it's 38 degrees. It's like, well, okay, it might be 38 degrees in Florida. That's great for you, but it's not supposed to be 34 degrees here in the UK. This is extreme for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a shame that potentially we've had similar experiences with the perceptions of horticulturalists.
Hmm.
I think that is definitely a universal thing, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah,
And if I can reflect on my experiences, when I was first coming from Spa-Schult and trying to access an education in plant science,
yeah,
a lot of the universities wouldn't even take an application from me.
really,
Yeah, so even at an university level, there's sort of this idea. I actually had an admissions officer tell me, well, you don't know enough about plants, which is really shocking. I was a horticulturalist, right?
yes, yeah, with
And
a
and
with
I
a
think
with
it's,
with a with a Chelsea medal behind you by then as well.
yeah, and I'd worked for the Humane Society, I'd worked on conservation projects, but because I had labelled myself as a horticulturalist,
Yeah,
that knowledge was felt to be too vocational or too hands-on.
yeah,
And it's such a dangerous way of thinking because you're describing the sort of notes that gardeners take and the photos that gardeners take. I would argue that that's research,
yeah.
that process in of itself is science, and something I'm really passionate about when I've done some work in the Liverpool area with Farm Urban, a fantastic social enterprise. Anyone can be a scientist, and science in of itself can be a spectrum from incredibly nerdy to incredibly vocational. And I
Hmm.
just wish that sort of more people took power in that, well, they are a researcher. Intrinsically, if you're looking around you, you're researching. If you're taking mental notes, you're researching. And I I think gardeners are such a fantastic source of information that really we need to learn to tap into,
Yeah.
especially as you say, in a climate change sense.
Yeah. I mean, you've made me feel incredibly good about myself, Ethan, actually, because again, I don't think people was talking about this on a live event I did a couple of days ago, that I don't think a lot of people realise what work goes on behind the scenes with myself when I'm bringing a rose review to the internet. That actually so many people, especially for instance, I'm going to pick on the beauty or the health industry, would unbox something and go, "Oh, look at this! It's an amazing. Look at this laboob or whatever it might be." And actually, for me, the review process on a plant starts normally 12 to 18 months before the video is created. The plant has to be in the ground here. I have to observe it for a minimum of 4 seasons before I will open my mouth and before I actually share any comments about it. And obviously, that requires a huge amount of space. That requires a video library and a photographic library. Each variety that I've covered, and I've covered over 300 varieties of roses so far, they have a minimum of 200 to 300 pictures and videos on my phone. The notes section on my phone, each variety has a note section, and I will make my observations every week, every fortnight, every month, whatever it might be. And I'm going back to that plant pretty much every single day as I walk about the garden. I work in it here, and I don't think a lot of people realise that there's quite that much. So you've made me feel like a scientist. You've made me
Yeah,
feel like I'm creating this catalogue, and I think the biggest strength I have in my position, and I'm talking. It's not about me. Today's episode is about you, but my video library and my data library of the bank of work that I have, I think is probably my largest. The research bank I've created is probably my
mhm.
largest attribute. It's my largest commodity.
Yeah, I just think it's important that people feel empowered to do that kind of work. And I think intrinsically, anyone that keeps a garden looks at what works and what doesn't,
Yes, yeah,
and to feel empowered that that is research and you're starting to do that sort of thinking, I think is really important. And actually, maybe this is a theme that's sort of carried with me my entire career, but when I supported the spa shop build at Chelsea, it was about Gilbert White, who was one of the first people to write down these notes from the garden, and actually is our first recorded occurrence of climate change through his
yes.
notes in his garden.
And again, well, just so the audience know, how long ago was that?
Oh, let me think. Maybe 6 years ago. You'll know better than me. It was the year that Chelsea was in September.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, no, no. No, I meant when these observations of climate
Oh,
change
Gilbert
were
White.
made.
Oh, if I had to guess, maybe 1820. I think we were doing our garden was on the 100-year anniversary of the
Okay.
publication of his natural calendar, I think. So
Yeah,
these are really, really sort of old sort of banks of knowledge. And I mean, the
but
work he was doing at Selborne Manor, he was one of the first people to grow melons in the UK. Like, he was a real visionary.
yeah. But again, we'll just let that sit with the audience if they were paying attention to what I was trying to lead you to there. That the first observations of climate change were 100 years ago. And we're
Yeah,
still
yeah, and he,
and we're still as a popular world population still struggling to respond to those findings and the information that comes out almost on a daily basis across the world, and we're still struggling to make the changes to either stop it, slow it down, or even try and reverse it.
yeah, and I mean, he observed it through the birds that were flying through his garden and
Yeah,
the different flowers that came up,
just
and
basic
maybe,
observations.
yeah, maybe if some of the people that are a bit untrustworthy of climate change spent a year in the garden and then another year in the garden, I think they would probably sort of realize that they're not correct in their opinions. But you could talk about challenging those opinions for a very long time. And
I've
yeah,
given up. I've given up trying. If I'm honest, I just hit the block and delete button. I can't change the world all on my
no,
own.
no. And I think people are entitled to their opinions, and increasingly people feel maybe untrustworthy of scientists. But
Yeah.
I promise your listeners that ecologists, we're not lying to you. We're not. There's no win in
You're not
lying
trying
to
to,
you.
again, you have to ask yourself, who is trying to sell you what? If someone is
Yeah,
trying to
yeah,
make money
yeah.
out of this, and if someone is not trying to make money out of this, I would believe the person not making the money.
Yeah, I promise you, I'm not funded by big soil. Like the amount of money I'm making at the moment, it wouldn't be worth me lying to you.
Ethan, I have really thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. I'm going to cut you short a little bit there, otherwise, I'm going to have editing and posting problems. But I think we could continue this conversation for some time. What is next for you over the next sort of 12 months? What are you focusing your attention on?
So I have just finished a real bookmark of my career. I've published my first paper and I've submitted
Congratulations.
my master's thesis. And
Wow.
now I am really sinking my teeth into my PhD at the University of Edinburgh and the Botanical Gardens
Well,
here at Edinburgh.
it's a beautiful garden. So I hope you enjoy your time there, and I will catch up with you again soon. Thank you so much for your time
Yeah,
today.
lovely to speak.
All right then, take good care now. Bye bye. Now, I know I'm not going to do myself any favours whatsoever by saying this, and I'm going to make myself sound very typically old, but it's really lovely to talk to somebody as young and as passionate as Ethan, who through a series of movements has found a passion for horticulture, science, biology and everything outdoorsy. Following different strands of interest, Ethan has found his way into his ideal career and continues to educate himself. The conversation I found was really, really stimulating, and I hope that you head over to his Instagram profile and show his account some love. Now, I know Ethan needs absolutely no endorsement or validation from myself, but I predict great things for his future. I think anybody with the passion that he has in the subject matter that he has the potential to discover some really wonderful and great things. So I, for one, will be looking out for his name popping up on all sorts of very important things in the future. Next week, the Gardner Ben podcast once again takes flight, and we're travelling just as far as we have ever gone before, heading off to the Gold Coast of Australia, where I get to talk to the absolutely wonderful Chloe, a member of the Gold Coast Rose Society, who's growing roses in Australia. So look out for our conversation next week. The Gardner Ben podcast is brought to you in association with Peter Beales Roses, winner of 30 Chelsea Gold medals and creating timeless roses since 1968. Go online and shop at www.peterbealesroses.com and make sure that you're following along on Instagram and TikTok. And until next week, happy gardening.